My name is Evelyn. I was young, full of hope, and ready to take on the world with the man I had chosen to marry. Gaius, my husband, was everything I had ever dreamed of. I remember the first time I met Gaius. It was at a friend's gathering, a small get-together filled with laughter and music. He walked in, a little late, but when he did, everything seemed to stop for a moment. He had this presence that commanded attention without him ever trying. I was sitting at the edge of the room, sipping my drink, when our eyes met across the crowd. He smiled at me, and I felt a warmth spread through me that I couldn't explain. It wasn't just his good looks, it was the way he carried himself, the way he made people feel seen and valued. We talked that night, and I remember feeling an instant connection. It wasn't long before we were inseparable. We spent hours talking about everything, our hopes, our fears, our dreams. Gaius had a way of listening to me like I was the only person in the world, and that made me feel like I could be myself, fully and without hesitation. It was easy to fall for him. So, when he proposed, I didn't hesitate for a second. We got married in a small ceremony, surrounded by our closest friends and family. It was simple, but perfect. We had our whole lives ahead of us, and I couldn't wait to build that future with him. In the beginning, everything was as it should have been. We moved into a beautiful home, a space we both poured our hearts into. We filled it with laughter and plans for the future. Every morning, I would wake up next to Gaius, and I would think to myself how lucky I was to have found someone so wonderful. We talked about growing old together, about having children, about traveling the world, and about all the little things we would do in the years to come. We were a team, a perfect match in every way. It all started with one simple, yet painful truth. My husband wasn't as good in bed as I had hoped. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a minor issue, something that might resolve itself with time. I told myself that it was natural for a relationship to have its ups and downs, and that passion would ebb and flow. After all, we were still newlyweds, still in that honeymoon phase, or so I thought. But as the months went by, I realized this wasn't a temporary problem, it was something deeper, something more unsettling. It wasn't that Gaius didn't try, he truly did. I could see it in the way he looked at me sometimes, that desperate glint in his eyes, as if he was searching for the spark that once existed between us. But no matter how hard he tried, it felt as though something was missing. Each time we shared intimate moments, it felt less like an expression of love and more like an obligation, something we did because we were supposed to, not because we wanted to. And that truth stung every time. I would lie there in bed beside him, my body still, my mind racing. I wanted to feel that connection, that spark, that fire I had imagined would burn between us forever. But instead, I was left feeling cold and distant, my heart sinking with every passing moment. I wanted to be close to him, to feel cherished, but instead, I felt invisible. The intimacy that should have brought us closer seemed to create an even wider gap between us. For a long time, I convinced myself that it was just a phase. I told myself that maybe things would improve with time, that it was normal to go through periods of uncertainty in a marriage. I thought that perhaps we were just out of sync, or that he was dealing with stress from work. Maybe it was the pressures of life that had begun to weigh on him, making it hard for him to focus on us. I tried to be patient, tried to reassure myself that it would get better. But no matter how much I hoped, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the problem never seemed to disappear. Instead, it got worse. I began to feel more and more disconnected from him, as though we were living separate lives under the same roof. The man I had married, the man who had once made me feel special and loved, was slipping away from me, and I couldn't understand why. Every night, I would lay beside him, longing for the closeness we once shared, but it never came. His touch felt mechanical, his kisses hollow, and the intimacy that should have bound us together felt more like a painful reminder of what we had lost. It wasn't just the physical distance that troubled me, it was the emotional distance that had begun to creep in. Gaius had always been affectionate in the beginning, always touching my arm, holding my hand, whispering sweet things in my ear. But now, those gestures had become rare, and when they did happen, they felt forced. I started to question myself, wondering if I had done something wrong. Was I not enough? Was I not attractive to him anymore? Or was it something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. The more I tried to fix things, the more I realized that I didn't know how to fix it. I talked to him, gently at first, then more urgently, trying to express my frustrations, my pain. I wanted him to know how much I loved him, how much I wanted our relationship to thrive. But every conversation seemed to end the same way, with him apologizing, telling me he was just tired, or that he didn't know what was wrong either. But the truth was, I didn't feel seen anymore. I didn't feel wanted. At first, I wondered if this was just part of growing older, if relationships naturally changed over time. But it wasn't just about aging, it was about the emotional intimacy, the connection that had once seemed so effortless between us, now fraying at the edges. And no matter how hard I tried to hold it together, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The love I had felt for Gaius, the deep, burning affection that had once defined us, seemed to have faded into something else, something distant, something unfamiliar. And with each passing day, I felt more and more like a stranger in my own marriage. For so long, I had hoped things would change. I kept convincing myself that it was just a rough patch, that this wasn't the end, that love would be enough to pull us through. But deep down, I knew that love alone wasn't enough. There was something deeper we had lost, and I didn't know how to get it back. The yearning I felt for intimacy, for closeness, became a silent ache in my chest, a constant reminder of the man I had married, and the man I was losing. No matter how many times I tried to reach out to Gaius, no matter how many ways I tried to spark that fire again, it seemed like the more I reached, the further he pulled away. The truth I had been avoiding for so long was becoming undeniable. I could no longer deny the emptiness I felt, both in my heart and in my bed. And as much as I tried to hold on to the hope that things might improve, deep down, I knew that the intimacy we once shared was gone, and it wasn't coming back. The first time I truly felt the weight of loneliness in my marriage was the evening Gaius came home and told me he had to travel for work. I understood. His job had always required him to go on business trips, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks at a time. It was a part of his career that I had learned to accept, though I never truly liked the idea of him being away. But that evening, there was something in the way he spoke, something off about him that immediately caught my attention. Usually, when Gaius left for a trip, we'd share a warm, lingering kiss, a gentle promise to stay safe and come home soon. I'd hug him tightly, savoring the moment, and he'd reassure me that he'd be back before I knew it. But that night, when I went to kiss him goodbye, he pulled back a little too quickly, almost as if he didn't want to be touched. The absence of his usual affection hit me like a cold wave, and I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just the stress of the trip weighing on him. But then, as he turned to leave, he said something that struck me, something that made my heart ache with confusion. "I'll be back soon." That was it. No details. No comforting words. Just a vague promise that didn't quite sit right with me. The days that followed felt like an eternity. The silence in our home was deafening. The usual hum of our daily lives, the shared laughter, the small moments of intimacy, had all been replaced by a thick, palpable emptiness. I tried to distract myself with work, with chores, with anything to fill the void that Gaius's absence had created. But nothing seemed to work. The house felt too quiet, too big without him. I missed the sound of his voice, the way he would make the most mundane conversations feel special. But what struck me the most was the growing sense of uncertainty gnawing at me. At first, I thought it was just a fluke. Maybe Gaius was caught up in something important at work, or maybe he was just exhausted from his travels. But as days turned into weeks, I couldn't ignore the growing feeling of abandonment that settled deep within my chest. The calls stopped coming as often, and when they did, they were short, distant, almost as though he was somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't. His messages were curt, brief to the point of feeling almost mechanical. I would send him a text, asking how he was, how his work trip was going, but he'd reply with one or two words, just enough to acknowledge that he had seen my message but not enough to engage in a real conversation. I tried to push the doubts aside. He's just busy, I told myself, he's just caught up in his work. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more the distance between us grew. I didn't know how to reach him anymore. Even when I called him, he would answer in a way that felt detached, like he was talking to a stranger rather than his wife. His voice, which used to carry warmth and affection, now sounded hollow, distant. I wanted to talk to him about it, to ask him if something was wrong, if there was something I had missed. But every time I tried to bring it up, he would brush it off with excuses. "Work's been hectic," he'd say, his voice strained, as if he were trying to keep something hidden. "I'll explain everything when I get back," he would add, but the promise never seemed to hold any weight. Each time he said those words, I felt a little more like I was grasping at air, a little more like I was losing him, and I didn't know how to stop it. It wasn't just the loneliness that cut through me, it was the uncertainty, the not knowing. There was something in his voice, in the way he avoided certain topics, that made me feel like I was being kept in the dark. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the empty space beside me in bed, wondering if he was thinking of me at all. Was he just too busy with work? Or was something more serious happening? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling me, something that was slowly unraveling between us. I tried to talk to him again, this time with a little more urgency. I needed answers. I needed reassurance that everything was okay, that we were okay. But whenever I would reach out, his responses were more distant, more distracted. "I'll be home soon," he would say, but each time, the words felt emptier, as though he were trying to placate me without actually addressing my concerns. The more I tried to connect with him, the more I felt like I was speaking to a wall. I began to wonder if I had done something wrong. Had I pushed him away somehow? Had I not been a good wife? The questions spiraled in my mind, but no answers ever came. And as the weeks dragged on, I began to feel like I was living in a parallel universe where everything around me was normal, but inside, everything was falling apart. I was desperate for some kind of clarity, some sign that Gaia still cared for me, still wanted to come home to me. But all I received were empty promises and vague explanations. I was starting to lose hope, not just in our marriage, but in the man I thought I knew so well. The man who once made me feel cherished, loved, and important was now a stranger, someone I couldn't reach, someone who seemed to have slipped away without me even noticing. I realized then that the loneliness I was feeling wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. It was the isolation that came from being with someone who no longer seemed to be present, no longer seemed to share the same connection we once had. And as much as I tried to hold on, to believe that things would get better, I couldn't shake the growing fear that Gaius might never come back to me, not truly. Not the way he once was. One evening, after yet another long and particularly lonely day, I found myself sitting on the porch of our home, staring blankly at the street in front of me. The world around me seemed so quiet, almost still. The streetlights flickered dimly in the distance, casting soft shadows on the ground. I couldn't shake the feeling of being utterly alone, and the weight of it pressed down on me with every passing minute. The silence was overwhelming, and it made the loneliness I had been trying to ignore all day feel even more unbearable. That was when I noticed him, Mr. Adebayo, my neighbor. He was walking home from the corner store, carrying a small bag of groceries in one hand. I'd always known him to be a kind, respectful man. In his mid-50s, he was the kind of person you could count on, the kind of neighbor who always had a smile on his face and a helping hand to offer. He was well liked in the neighborhood, not just for his generosity, but for the warmth and wisdom that seemed to emanate from him. He had a way of speaking that made people feel at ease, as if everything was going to be okay, no matter how difficult things seemed. He was also a good friend to Gaius and me, always ready to lend a hand with any project we had around the house, whether it was fixing a leaky pipe or trimming the trees in the yard. I had always appreciated his company, but that evening, his presence was like a lifeline I didn't even realize I needed. As he walked by, he caught sight of me sitting on the porch, my shoulders slumped, my eyes distant. He stopped in his tracks and, with his signature warm smile, waved at me. "Good evening, Bola. Are you all right?" His voice was gentle and soothing, as if he could sense the sadness that hung in the air around me. I looked up, startled at first, then offered him a weak smile in return. "Ah, good evening, Mr. Adebayo," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'm fine. Just a little tired, that's all." But I could see the concern in his eyes. It was the kind of look that only someone who truly cared could give. He didn't just take my words at face value. He saw through the facade, saw the sadness that I had been trying to hide. He didn't push me to open up, but I could tell he was waiting for me to say more if I was ready. And for some reason, I felt a sense of comfort in that quiet patience. He paused for a moment, then, with a slow and deliberate movement, he sat down beside me on the porch steps. He didn't say anything at first, he simply sat there, giving me space to gather my thoughts. His presence was calming, almost like a steady anchor in the midst of my swirling emotions. I wasn't sure why I felt so at ease with him, but it was as if his mere company made the world feel less heavy, less overwhelming. There was no judgment in his demeanor, no rush to fix things, just a quiet understanding. "You know, Bola," he began after a moment, his voice low and sincere, "I've known you for years now. And I can tell when something's bothering you. You've always been such a strong woman, always with a smile on your face. But I can see right now, something's not right." He paused, and his gaze softened. "You don't have to keep it inside. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." For a brief moment, I just sat there, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to shrug it off, to tell him I was fine, that everything was okay. After all, who was I to burden him with my problems? He had his own life, his own challenges. But another part of me, a part that had been aching for someone to truly listen, was drawn to his words, to the genuine concern that lingered in his voice. There was something about him, something that made me feel safe, as though I could trust him with my pain. Maybe it was the years of kindness he had shown, the way he never rushed me, never pushed me to open up before I was ready. Maybe it was the way he had always been there for us, without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. Or maybe it was just the fact that I had no one else to turn to. Gaius was distant, and I didn't know who else would understand the complexity of the situation I was in. I hesitated for a long time, my mind racing with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. But as I sat there, feeling the weight of the loneliness pressing in on me, something inside me broke, just a little. I realized that, for the first time in a long while, I didn't have to face this struggle alone. Mr. Adebayo wasn't just a neighbor, he was someone who genuinely cared, someone who might just understand more than I expected. Finally, I turned to him, my voice trembling slightly. "It's just, things haven't been the same with Gaius lately. I don't know what's happening, but he's been distant. It's like he's not the man I married anymore." I paused, trying to find the words to express the turmoil inside me. "I feel like I'm losing him, Mr. Adebayo. And I don't know how to fix it." I hadn't meant to say so much, but once the words were out, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The tears that I had been holding back for so long finally began to fall, and I didn't try to stop them. Mr. Adebayo didn't say anything right away. He just sat there beside me, his presence steady and comforting, as if he understood the depths of my pain without needing to say a word. After a long while, he finally spoke, his voice soft but filled with compassion. "Bola, I can't pretend to know exactly what's going on in your marriage, but I do know that relationships, like everything else in life, go through seasons. And sometimes, those seasons are harder than others. But that doesn't mean it's the end. You deserve to be happy, to feel loved. And if Gaius isn't able to give you that right now, it's okay to seek the support you need, whether it's from someone you trust, like me, or from a professional." His words weren't a quick fix, but they were a reminder that I didn't have to face this alone. I wasn't sure what the future held for Gaius and me, but at that moment, sitting on the porch with Mr. Adebayo, I realized that I didn't have to carry this burden by myself. Sometimes, just talking about it was the first step toward healing. With a long, weary sigh, I found myself speaking before I even realized it. "It's Gaius. He's been so distant lately. I don't know what's going on, but it's like he's avoiding me. I've tried everything I can think of, but nothing seems to make a difference. It feels like we're drifting further apart every day, and I don't know what to do about it." Mr. Adebayo sat quietly beside me, his gaze gentle but unwavering. I could feel his presence beside me, steady and reassuring, as though he was giving me the space I needed to unload all the emotions that had been building up inside. When I finished, he spoke, his voice calm and thoughtful. "Bola, relationships can be complicated, even the ones we hold closest. Sometimes, people withdraw, and it can be for reasons they don't even fully understand themselves. But that doesn't mean you should have to carry that burden on your own." His words sank deep within me, a soothing balm for my frayed nerves. I nodded, feeling the weight in my chest lighten just a little, but it was still there, heavy and persistent. "I just wish things could be like they were before," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Adebayo didn't immediately respond, and for a long moment, we both sat in silence. His eyes drifted out toward the street, as if he were pondering something deeply, carefully choosing his next words. After a while, he turned to face me, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes, Bola, we get so caught up in the hustle and bustle of life, in our own worlds, that we forget to truly connect with the people who matter most to us. It's easy to lose sight of what's important. But that doesn't mean it's too late. If you want, I could help you find a way to talk to Tunde, to reach him in a way that maybe you haven't tried yet." His words sparked a flicker of hope inside me, a faint but undeniable light in the darkness. I wasn't sure what he meant, or how things would change, but I was willing to try anything at this point. "Thank you, Mr. Adebayo," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what to do anymore. I just want things to be right between us, to feel close to him again. I don't know if I can keep going like this." Mr. Adebayo smiled warmly, his gaze filled with understanding. "I understand, Bola. Relationships are never easy, but they're worth fighting for. Don't worry, we'll figure it out together." The next few days felt like a blur. I continued to reach out to Tunde, to try and bridge the distance that seemed to grow wider with each passing day. But no matter what I did, he remained cold, distant, unresponsive. The silence between us seemed to grow louder, and with it, the loneliness that had already settled in my heart deepened. I couldn't shake the feeling of being lost, of being ignored, of not knowing where I stood with the man I had once felt so close to. But even in the midst of my isolation, Mr. Adebayo remained a steady presence in my life. He checked in on me regularly, never once making me feel like I was burdening him. His visits were always brief but comforting, like small reminders that I wasn't completely alone. Sometimes, we would sit together on my porch, our conversations flowing freely as we talked about everything and nothing at all. He was a quiet observer of life, never forcing his opinions on me, always ready to listen when I needed to talk. And then one evening, when I was sitting on the porch once more, feeling the familiar ache of loneliness in my chest, things took an unexpected turn. Tunde had been away on yet another work trip, and as always, I found myself waiting for him to return, hoping that something would change between us. It was then that Mr. Adebayo appeared on the horizon, walking toward me with his usual kind smile. He was holding a small basket of fresh fruit, the bright colors of the fruit contrasting against the dusky evening sky. "I thought you might like some fruit," he said, offering the basket to me. "It's a little something to brighten your day." I smiled, grateful for the gesture, and took the basket from him. "Thank you, Mr. Adebayo. This is just what I needed." We settled onto the porch steps, and for a while, we ate the fruit in comfortable silence. The gentle crunch of apples and the sweetness of fresh oranges filled the quiet, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The conversation drifted naturally, as it always did when Mr. Adebayo was around. He shared stories from his youth, from his own experiences with love, relationships, and the lessons he had learned over the years. As he spoke, I listened intently, hanging on to every word. There was a depth to him, a quiet wisdom that made his presence feel so much more profound. "I've learned a lot in my years, Bola," he said, his voice becoming more serious now, as if he were imparting a lesson. "One thing I know for sure is that true love isn't just about the good times. It's about understanding each other, being there for one another when things get tough. And sometimes, that means finding the strength to help each other grow. It's not easy, but it's worth it." I looked at him, a deep sense of gratitude filling my heart. "Thank you, Mr. Adebayo. You've given me so much to think about. I don't know if I've ever really understood love like that before." He smiled softly, his eyes filled with warmth. "I'm happy to help, Bola. Just remember, you're never alone in this." As the night drew to a close, I sat there, a quiet sense of clarity beginning to settle within me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like there was hope. Hope that things with Gaius might improve, but more importantly, hope that I could find peace within myself, no matter what the future held. I realized that I didn't have to carry this burden alone. I had people who cared about me, and that made all the difference.